Moving to the 15-man game, Rob, we had great wins for, like I mentioned, the South African teams. The Kings beating the Sunwolves away, Sharks beating the Brumbies, the Stormers beating the Jaguares, the Lions smashing the Waratahs, and then obviously the local derby between the Cheetahs and the Bulls. Now, that's 2 out of 2 wins for the Lions and Stormers, obviously the highest finishing South African sides last season, so I guess to be expected. What did you take from this weekend's results on the local front?
Quite a lot, Nick. It was an encouraging weekend. One sort of left the television a little bit bog-eyed after a run of South African matches, all sort of in a row. And in fact, they were quite rewarding to watch, which was a real pleasure, because I mean, last season we saw lots of really turgid rugby from South African teams who just genuinely looked kind of light years behind the Australasian sides, and obviously more specifically the New Zealand teams. I would say, cautiously, given that we haven't yet played any New Zealand teams, that perhaps the gap is closing, that maybe South Africa, there just seemed to be a sort of a collective, a new sort of collective gees, a new energy. I think the conditioning of a lot of our franchises is a lot better. I think a lot of players who carried a bit of excess baggage last year have actually shed it quite well. Some big burly forwards, for instance, across the franchises, who suddenly look a lot more mobile, getting around the park, making their tackles, getting involved in linking play. So you're getting more of a sort of a genuinely sort of 15-man style. Make no mistake, it's still a little bit naive in some instances. The Bulls are struggling a little bit with this new sort of high-tempo approach, and they seem to have forgotten that your forwards have still got to do quite a bit of donkey work before you have the sort of right to sort of spread the ball wide. They spent a lot of time sort of on the back foot against the Cheetahs, and that'll be a little bit of a concern for the three-time champions of the past. But having said that, I think even the Bulls still have it within them to turn things around. They started with 2 tough derbies, Stormers and then Cheetahs, both away. So no chance yet to sort of play in front of the Loftus faithful. That comes up very shortly after a bye when they play the Sunwolves, I think, at Loftus. So that should be a win. That should get the confidence going. But for me, the real highlight, if I had to pick just one game, would probably be the Sharks toppling the Brumbies in Canberra. It wasn't a result that I predicted. In fact, I didn't predict too many right this weekend. But a delightful result. They didn't play champagne rugby all the time, but I thought that they stuck at it really well. They went 12 or 13 points down early on, if I recall correctly, so it looked as though the writing was on the wall, and they came back superbly. Played really intelligent and sometimes quite good territorial-based rugby, and to win it in the way that they did was fantastic, because they could have just kicked the ball out when it was, I think it was 22-all ahead of the decisive try. And a lot of South African teams in the past on the road would have thought, well, let's just get the ball out after the siren and bank the sort of honourable draw. But they didn't do that. They kept a little attack going. They built an attack in very narrow space down the left touchline, and the substitute Kerwin Bosch put through a lovely little grubber, which Lucanio Am picked up absolutely brilliantly on his fingertips and went over for a try. And you've got to celebrate that sort of enterprise. So lots of good signs. And as you say, Stormers and Lions, 2 wins out of 2. Stormers had a little bit of a comeuppance in terms of maybe just a little bit of a correction on how good they might have thought they were after the Bulls game. And Robbie Fleck didn't seem to mind that too much. He sort of thought maybe a little sort of wake-up call wasn't the worst thing. And I think just happy that they actually banked the win, the basic win, against a pretty decent Jaguares side. So generally a really encouraging weekend, I thought.
Garen, the Lions, obviously last year's finalists, do you think that they maybe a shade off their sort of form at the end of last season, or I mean, is the best yet to come?
I certainly think they're a step behind perhaps how they were at this stage last year, remembering that they actually started last year on the road and they recorded some really good wins in Australasia, and that sort of built their season. It was based on those early points picked up away from home, came back to Ellis Park, and they were really tough to beat. I think I think they'll certainly get better. 2 wins is 2 wins. You can't take that away from them. Victories don't come easily in this tournament. We've learned that, unless perhaps you're playing against the Sunwolves, and it's not that difficult. But you've got to earn your 4 points, 5 points. Not a lot of teams even picked up 5 points. We saw last year at all. So 4 points is still better than nothing, and it's very difficult to play catch up in this tournament. I think that's the key. Once you're ahead, you tend to see the teams that are ahead will stay there. The teams that are playing catch up won't ever actually catch up. That's what makes me worry a little bit about the Bulls. They've got, I think, 1 point after 2 rounds. They're 8 points, I think, behind the Stormers in their conference. I don't see any way, no matter how much they improve playing back at Loftus, that they can possibly catch up with the Stormers now. They've all got to play with similar teams for the remainder of the tournament. It's obviously not going to be easy to play against those New Zealand teams, even at Loftus, where I think the Bulls will obviously be better. The New Zealand teams will enjoy the hard fields, the altitude, and they'll play their running rugby, and I think the Bulls will struggle again. So, I'm already penciling in the Stormers as conference winners of their conference, and then looking at the other conference, again, it perhaps is going to be the Lions and the Sharks that will come through from there, giving us the three teams from the South African group that will go through to the quarterfinals. Then looking at Australia, I think they've been absolutely woeful after 2 rounds. It's going to be very difficult to even predict a winner of that conference. They're all playing incredibly poor, substandard rugby. I think Michael Checker, the Wallaby coach, must be really worried. This weekend they only had the Force as their only winner, and I don't think anyone would have predicted that. And then you look at the New Zealand teams, and all 5 teams are playing incredible rugby. Even the Highlanders, who are 0-2, having lost 2 games in Dunedin, are still look on paper as though they could beat any team in the tournament. So that's, I think, the difference between the conferences at the moment. These things swing every single week. We could well be sitting here next week or the week after lamenting the poor form of the South African teams and why certain players aren't putting their hands up. It sort of just swings around every 7 days. So it's looking good at the moment. There's some South African teams that are playing well. The thing is, we just haven't played any decent teams yet. We haven't played those New Zealand teams. As Rob mentioned off air, the first time we do meet them is in round 5. So we've still got to go through 2 full rounds where I expect us to record more good results. But then I think things will slowly have a correction in the standings, and you'll sort of see those New Zealand teams suddenly beating the South African teams, and then not looking so rosy from our point of view. But you've got to go with what you can see so far, and so far it's not too bad.